humans despite bad will stooges of God. The worldly leadership will by no means be able to stop an event which the divine will has determined since eternity, but it will unconsciously contribute to it. That is, human will is cause for that what God's will brings to execution, although the human will has expected and intended a completely different effect. Humans plan something God opposing, and God lets it happen, steers however the effect so to speak to the good, so far as that the human soul can gain advantage from it, if it does not adjust itself obviously God opposing. Earthly, however, man must also bear the consequences of God opposing actions and thoughts, so that he recognizes how a wrong will has an effect, and he strives to change this wrong will. But what God has ultimately decided, the will of men no longer stops. And even worldly power must recognize its powerlessness in the face of an event which takes place without human intervention and testifies to a power that governs everything. Worldly power can therefore unhindered, but it cannot avert or revert or stop anything, if God's plan is different. And the plan of God strives for a revolution, which is spiritually significant, but will also make itself earthly noticeable. Because only by a shaking of the thinking by earthly tribulation and misery a spiritual change of humans is to be obtained. And that is why God takes the wrong thinking as the occasion for an event which comes to an outbreak in nature. Destructions and annihilations, which human will cause, bring the forces of nature to the release, with which mankind does not expect. Human will plans a work of destruction of horrible extent, and divine will lets it come to fruition on an unimaginable scale by commanding the spirits of nature to rebel against the human will to destroy, which are now active with such force that the earth shakes and countless people lose their lives. And human will is not able to put a stop to it. Human intervention is unsuccessful, and the earthly powerful one recognizes his powerlessness towards the Creator of heaven and earth. But he does not recognize him, he rebels against the power that is stronger than him, and thus he puts himself completely under the control of Satan, to whom he is already in bondage. And Satan now uses him for an open fight against God. And this is the prelude to the coming battle of faith, which is inevitable, in which God will confront his adversary. In which the faithful to God will fight against the children of Satan, and under the leadership of Jesus Christ will also gain the victory. It is the last battle that the adversary will fight on this earth, because it ends with his capture. As soon as he has abused his power in such a way that he tries to force people into a way of thinking that is completely contrary to God, his power is played out, because the action against God himself can result in nothing else than his renewed bondage, because otherwise creation could no longer fulfill its purpose, because then the spiritual being that has reached the last stage of development would be deprived of every possibility for the last decision, for the final release from the form. For this last decision is a matter of the free will, which can turn upward or also downward, but for this also must necessarily have the knowledge of both poles, which it can strive towards. But this knowledge is withheld from him by the work of Satan, so that all knowledge about God, about Jesus Christ, his doctrine of love and his work of redemption is undermined, and Satan makes use of people who carry his God-opposing will in themselves. For this is a danger for all spiritual things, which must inevitably be turned around by taking all power away from God's adversary, and by a time of spiritual peace and brightest light replacing the time of the fight between light and darkness. For the power of God is greater, and his will rules heaven and earth. And whether the people on earth also believe themselves powerful, because they do not a higher power. They will always be only the henchmen of the highest power with their measures and decrees, indeed working in the opposite will but still being used for the work which God Himself has intended since eternity. For all powers must serve Him, good and bad, voluntarily and involuntarily these services are rendered, because they are all subject to His will. And therefore also the world events will go their course according to divine will, although the human will is completely directed against God and carries out works, which are works of Satan. And God does not prevent them from doing so, but they participate unintentionally in the execution of the plan that has been determined since eternity. They themselves hasten the judgment which will befall them, which means an end for this earth and all people living on it as well as for every creature, except for the small group of God-faithful fighters whom the Lord Himself will bring home before the end. Amen.